What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. We continue with our 2025 college football schedule preview and very early projected record series. The Kansas Jayhawks are up next. Before we look ahead to 2025, let's take a look back at what the Jayhawks did in 2024. Here are my projections and predictions last year for Kansas. My projection for this team was at 9-3, and then my prediction for them was also 9-3. So I was very high on the Jayhawks last year. I even picked them, to be like a top contender in the Big 12. But it was the complete opposite of that. Kansas coming off a disappointing year last year, going just 5-7 in 2024. Not even making it into a bowl game. They came close to making it into a bowl game because they did get on a winning streak in the month of November, but they did lose their last game of the regular season. So that's how they ended up falling short of making it to a bowl game. So no bowl game last year for Kansas. It does surprise me a lot that they were able to go 5-7 instead of just going like where my projection and prediction had them at 9-3. I could also see them possibly going 8-4 last year, and they had a pretty easy schedule. You look at the schedule from last year in 2024. Again, they were 5-7 with this schedule. First off, you look at who they played in the non-conference. They played Lindenwood on the road at Illinois and then also UNLV. The non-conference schedule ended up being tougher than maybe we didn't expect it to be. You look at Illinois, that was a very big surprise team from last year. And then you had UNLV out of the group of five that was actually a pretty good team out of the Mountain West. So those two games, I think that's where the disappointment started to, really begun here for Kansas. And then once they got into Big 12 play, it was just all downhill from there. They lost, they beat Lindenwood, but then they lost their next 5 games here, all the way from September the 7th all the way to October the 5th. And again, you look at these teams that they lost to last year, some of them ended up being as good as we maybe didn't think they were going to be. You look at their home schedule in the Big 12. They played TCU, Houston, Iowa State, and Colorado. So they played all those teams at home last year in the Big 12. They lost to TCU, but they won against Houston, Iowa State, and Colorado. Of course, Iowa State and Colorado, those two teams ended up being, maybe as good as we think they were going to be, but I didn't expect Iowa State to be very, very good. They beat those two teams, but, those were big wins for them. And then you take a look at the road schedule for Kansas. They had to play at West Virginia, at Arizona State, at Kansas State, and then also BYU and Baylor. So they played all those teams on the road last year. Arizona State ended up being a surprise team as well. Same thing with BYU. I thought those were very winnable games there for Kansas. But again, those two teams ended up being as good as I was thinking they were going to be. But they were good as they were just a surprise team. Let's just put it that way. So the schedule last year wasn't awful for Kansas, but it was just really, honestly, a big surprise that they went 5-7 because this is a program that's been on the rise now for the last couple years, and they had a pretty good year in 2023. What does it look like, though, for 2025? Here's the schedule for Kansas heading into 2025. Before we go game by game, let's take a look at their non-conference opponents for this season. So this is their non-conference schedule. They will play Fresno State out of the group of 5, and then they got an FCS team here in Wagner, and then they got Missouri here out of the SEC on the road. So non-conference schedule pretty similar to last year. You got one group of 5 team that you'll play, and it's another Mountain West team in Fresno State. That could also be a tricky game. UNLV was pretty good last year, but Fresno State's a pretty good quality group of 5 team out of the Mountain West. Wagner should be a pretty easy game there for the Jayhawks, but then Missouri, an old Big 12 rivalry here between these two teams. Looking forward to this one here between these two teams, but it's on the road, so that's going to be pretty tricky there for the Jayhawks. They might be an underdog in that game, but non-conference schedule is not too tough here for Kansas. Let's now take a look at their home games in the Big 12. They will play West Virginia, Cincinnati, Kansas State, Oklahoma State, and Utah. So you look at West Virginia and Kansas State, those might be the two toughest games that they have at home. Those are probably the most important games right there. because the rest of the 3 games are pretty winnable. Cincinnati, Oklahoma State, and Utah, those were not really good teams last year, so the Jayhawks might have a chance to win these 3 home games, but some of them could be a little bit tricky and could go either way as well. But yeah, West Virginia, you get them at home. You lost to them last year, and then they play rival Kansas State. This rivalry has not been really close over the few years that they played against each other, but they've had some close games. Let's be honest, they've had some close games now in the past, but yeah, those are the 2 games that you like to have at home here if you're a Kansas fan. Let's now take a look at their away schedule in the Big 12. They will play at UCF, at Texas Tech, at Arizona, and then on the road at Iowa State. So the Iowa State game is definitely probably the toughest road game on here for the Jayhawks. They might be an underdog in that game. Of course, the Cyclones were a team that was not really a big surprise in my opinion, but they went to the Big 12 championship last year, so that might be a tough game there for Kansas. And then you got Texas Tech. That could be a tricky game as well, but pretty winnable here for the Jayhawks. And then UCF and Arizona, very winnable games here on the road. We'll see if UCF is a little bit better compared to last year, but they got a new coach, so I don't know how good they're going to be. Same thing with Arizona. They had a first-year head coach last year. We'll see if the Wildcats can turn things around. So that's your away schedule. Let's go back to the schedule now and go full game by game now for Kansas. They will start things off on a Friday, August 23rd. They'll play Fresno State. So this looks like it's going to be a week 0 game, because they have a couple of games in the month of August, so they play Fresno State first. Then you got Wagner here in week 1 on August 29th. That game will also be on a Friday, so you're playing back-to-back Friday night games here, it looks like, for Kansas, in the month of August. So they play those 2 teams in the month of August, and then they go on the road to play Missouri on September the 6th. So they play all 3 of their non-conference teams before they get into Big 12 play. They get a bye week here before playing West Virginia to open up Big 12 play on September 20th, and then they get Cincinnati at home on September 27th. Then it's on the road at UCF on October the 4th. Then you got Texas Tech also on the road on October the 11th. So you got back-to-back road games there with Texas Tech and UCF, 2 very tough back-to-backs there in the month of October. Then they get another bye week before playing rival Kansas State on October 25th. That's a pretty good spot for a bye week in my opinion before a big rivalry game. Then you got Oklahoma State on November 1st. Then it's Arizona on the road on November 8th, and then they get another bye week. Remember, all the teams that have a week 0 game, they get a 3rd bye, so that's how it works in college football. You get 3 bye weeks for the teams that play a week 0 game. They go on the road to play Iowa State coming out of the bye week, so they got back-to-back road games there with Arizona and Iowa State, but it's not in back-to-back weeks. They get a bye week in between those 2 games, and then they close things out on another Friday night game against Utah, so you got 3 weeknight games on this schedule for Kansas. And again, 3 bye weeks that will help them out pretty well, but they got Utah here on November 28th. So that is the schedule for Kansas for 2025. Let's now get to their projection here for the Jayhawks. This is the scale I'll be using for their official projection. Basically a 1% game in the red, that's pretty much counted as an automatic loss. 20% in the orange, that's where Kansas will be a double-digit underdog. And then 40% in the yellow, they'll be a 6 or 7 point underdog, so by less than a touchdown in that percentage. 50-50 games will stay in the white, games that really could go either way. And then your 60% games, they'll be favored by less than a touchdown, so 6 or 7 points, somewhere in that point range. And the 80% in the blue, they'll be favored by double digits. And then the green games are pretty much your automatic wins. They'll be favored by more than 3 touchdowns. So we'll start with the green games here for Kansas. And really, you only got one easy win, and that's Wagner here on August 29th. I think they'll be big favorites here against this FCS team. This game right here, the Jayhawks definitely should be able to take care of business. It would definitely be a big shock if Kansas were to lose this game. And it's on a Friday night. I get it. We've seen some big upsets on weeknight games, but this is a game that the Jayhawks should be able to take care of business in, and I think this game is definitely over that 95 to 99% range, and they definitely should be like 20-plus point favorites. And then we got one game here in the blue. That's going to be Fresno State. I'm going to put the Fresno State game here in the blue just because the Jayhawks last year lost to a Group of 5 team out of the Mountain West. And again, Fresno State's not a bad Group of 5 team. They're a really decent team. I wouldn't say a great team just like UNLV and Boise State, but they're right up there as a decent team. game. So that's not going to be an easy game there for the Jayhawks in my opinion, but I think they'll still be favored by double digits. And then I don't got any games here in the purple. Again, the rest of the schedule, you can't favor Kansas in any other game here, especially in the Big 12. But I got a few games on here where I think they're going to be underdogs. They're not in the red, but I do have one game here in the orange, and that's going to be the game against Iowa State on November 22nd. Look, I get it. They beat the Cyclones last year, but I'm going to put this game in the orange for right now just because it's on the road. And again, some of these, both of these teams are kind of in different tiers, based off of where these teams finished last year. Iowa State definitely finished way better than Kansas, even though the Cyclones did lose, and they still made it to the Big 12 championship. So I think as of right now, Iowa State is a much more talented team than Kansas is. Wouldn't say more talented because I think every team in the Big 12 is pretty even, but I'm going to go with Iowa State here as a double-digit favorite and put the Jayhawks as a double-digit underdog, so about 10 to 14 points. And then I got three games here in the yellow where I think the Jayhawks will be a 6 or 7 point underdog: Missouri, Texas Tech, and Kansas State. I think these three games, they'll be less than a touchdown underdog. Missouri, that's a pretty tough game there on the road, but that's a game they probably can win, to be honest. And then Texas Tech, that's a game they can probably win. And then also Kansas State, that's a rivalry game. Anything can happen. I know it should be a 50-50 game, but I'm going to stick with it here and put it in the yellow for right now. So at 40%, there'll be a 6 or 7 point underdog in all these three games. And then that's going to leave you with 6 total 50-50 games: West Virginia, Cincinnati, UCF, Oklahoma State, Arizona, and Utah. You look at Cincinnati, UCF, Oklahoma State, Arizona, and Utah. I think these are all right now pretty even matchups. And then West Virginia, that was a game that I was really close to putting in the yellow, but because it's at home here for Kansas, I'm going to keep it here as a 50-50 game for right now. So yeah, the Jayhawks, I think these are all your 50-50 games. Let's now get a projected record. What does this projected record come out to be here for Kansas based on how tough this schedule is? Well, you count the one green game as a win, and then you also count the blue game as a slight win as well, and then you count the orange game as a slight loss, and then you average out these three games in the yellow at 40%, and then average out the 50-50 games at 50%. And I think they're going to split these 50-50 games. They win 3 out of the 6. So let's say they beat West Virginia, Cincinnati, UCF, and then lose those games in the month of November. And then you got your one win in the green, and same thing with the blue. That's going to give you a total of 5 wins, including those 50-50 games. And that's what the projected record is for Kansas. It comes out to 5-7. So a 5-7 projection here for the Jayhawks. That's a pretty fair projection in my opinion, just based off of where they finished last year. I think Kansas will be almost a clear underdog in almost all their games. But again, these 6 50-50 games are going to decide their season. If they win more than 3, they can possibly go 6-6. If they win at least probably 5, they can probably win 7 games. But if they do worse than that, if they just win a couple games or maybe just one of those 50-50 games, then yeah, it's going to be a lot worse for the Jayhawks. They might go 3-9 or 4-8, and I think that's their worst case scenario. 4-8, and then 5-7 is in that middle, and then best case is making it to a bowl game at 6-6. Can Kansas turn things around in 2025? Let me guys know what you think about this projection down in the comments below for the Jayhawks. Thanks for watching this video, and stay tuned for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports YouTube channel.